The mahogany conference table gleamed under the law office's fluorescent lights as I watched my stepmother, Victoria, practically vibrate with anticipation. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her Hermes purse, while our family lawyer, Mr. Brennan, shuffled through the estate documents. My father had been dead for exactly 30 days, and Victoria couldn't wait another second to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. As outlined in the most recent amendment to Mr. Chen's will, Mr. Brennan began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, the bulk of the estate, including Chen Industries and its subsidiaries, passes to his surviving spouse, Victoria Chen. Victoria's lips curved into a triumphant smile as she shot me a look of pure vindictive pleasure. Finally, she breathed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Oh, Lily, don't look so devastated. Your father left you something too, didn't he, Mr. Brennan? The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Chen receives the family's original restaurant in Chinatown, valued at approximately $200,000, and a trust fund of $50,000 for her education. How generous, Victoria cooed, her diamond earrings catching the light as she tilted her head. That little restaurant where your grandparents started? How sentimental. Though I'm not sure what you'll do with it. You never did inherit your father's business acumen. I kept my expression carefully neutral, perhaps letting a hint of defeat creep into my eyes. Inside, however, I was counting down. 3 days. In 3 days, the FBI would be executing search warrants across 3 states, and Chen Industries, my father's supposed empire, would be exposed for what it truly was: a sophisticated money laundering operation for a Russian oligarch named Dmitry Volkov. But Victoria didn't know that, just as she didn't know that I had already lived through this moment once before. The first time I'd sat in this office in my previous life, I had fought her tooth and nail for my father's company. I had spent 2 years in court, depleting my grandmother's savings on legal fees, only to win control of Chen Industries 3 weeks before the FBI raid. The charges that followed destroyed me: conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, all crimes I knew nothing about. I spent 5 years in federal prison for crimes my father had committed, while Victoria walked free, playing the innocent widow who'd been graciously spared the burden of the corrupt company. I died in that prison, shanked by another inmate in a dispute I wasn't even part of, bleeding out on the concrete floor of the shower room at the age of 28. My last thought had been of the bitter irony: how Victoria had known all along what Chen Industries really was, how she'd manipulated the will's timing to ensure I'd be the one holding the bag when it all came crashing down. Then I woke up here 3 months ago, in my 21-year-old body, the day before my father's sudden heart attack. Lily, Mr. Brennan's voice pulled me back to the present. Do you understand the terms of the will? I understand, I said softly, allowing my voice to crack slightly. The restaurant and the education fund. That's fine. Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Oh, sweetheart, don't be too disappointed. Your father always said you were more suited to simple things. A little restaurant is perfect for you. You can play at being a business owner without any real responsibility. She stood, smoothing her black Chanel dress, the same one she'd worn to my father's funeral, though she'd been planning his death long before his heart gave out. I knew because in my previous life, I'd found the searches on her laptop during the legal battle. Inheritance law, California. Digitalis poisoning symptoms. Heart attack versus murder autopsy. Mr. Brennan, Victoria said, extending her hand to shake his. I'll need all the corporate documentation for Chen Industries transferred to my name immediately. I have a board meeting tomorrow, and I intend to take full control right away. Of course, Mrs. Chen. We'll have everything ready by end of business today. As we left the law office, Victoria insisted on walking me to my car, her arm linked through mine in a mockery of maternal affection. You know, Lily, she said as we reached the parking garage, I want you to know that I'm not completely heartless. If you ever need anything, money, advice, whatever, you can always come to me. Family is family, after all. The words were almost exactly the same as last time. In my previous life, I'd spat in her face. This time, I ducked my head and mumbled, Thank you, Victoria. She patted my cheek condescendingly. There's a good girl. Oh, and Lily, I'll need you to move out of the penthouse by the end of the week. I'm having it renovated. I nodded, keeping my eyes downcast to hide the satisfaction burning in them. I understand. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom in the penthouse, surrounded by boxes I'd been packing for days. Not that Victoria knew I'd already been preparing to leave. On my laptop, I pulled up the email I'd drafted but not sent, addressed to FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez. In my previous life, she'd been the one to arrest me, and she'd seemed genuinely sorry about it. "You seem like a nice kid," she'd said as she cuffed me. Wrong place, wrong time. But I wasn't going to send the email. That would be too traceable, too suspicious. Instead, I'd done something much simpler 3 weeks ago. I'd left an anonymous tip about suspicious wire transfers between Chen Industries and a known shell company in Cyprus. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was already investigating. They just didn't know yet that their small fish would lead them to a much bigger pond. My phone buzzed with a text from my stepsister, Cassandra. Victoria's daughter from her first marriage had always been her mother's perfect little soldier. "Mom says you need to be out by Friday. I'm taking your room for my walk-in closet." In my previous life, Cassandra had testified against me in court, claiming she'd overheard me discussing illegal transfers with my father. Complete fabrication, but the jury bought it. She'd worn a conservative sweater set to court, played the innocent stepsister who was just telling the truth, while her mother had coached her through every word. "No problem," I texted back. "Already packing." The truth was, I'd been busy these past 3 months. While my father was still alive, distracted by Victoria's careful ministrations of digitalis and his evening tea, I'd quietly moved my grandmother's jewelry from the penthouse safe to a safety deposit box only I knew about. I'd scanned and copied every document in his home office, including the real books for Chen Industries, the ones that showed the company had been hemorrhaging money for years, propped up only by regular influxes of cash from international investors. Most importantly, I'd found the thing Victoria didn't know existed: my father's insurance file. Even criminals don't trust other criminals, and my father had kept meticulous records of every dirty transaction, every bribe, every threat, all hidden in a climate-controlled storage unit in Daly City under his mother's maiden name. In my previous life, I'd never known about it. This time, I'd followed him there one evening 2 months ago and watched him enter the code. 3 days after the will reading, I was settling into my new apartment above the restaurant in Chinatown when my phone exploded with notifications. Every local news outlet was running the same breaking story: FBI raids Chen Industries headquarters in massive financial crimes investigation. I turned on the television just in time to see Victoria being led out of the Chen Industries building in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally cracking as cameras swarmed around her. Cassandra was right behind her, mascara streaming down her face as she screamed about it being a mistake. The reporter on scene was breathless with excitement. Sources tell us this investigation has been months in the making, with the FBI tracking suspicious wire transfers totaling over $300 million. The widow of recently deceased CEO Marcus Chen, Victoria Chen, had just taken control of the company 3 days ago, but investigators say she appears to have been involved in the operation for years. My doorbell rang, and I found Special Agent Martinez standing there, looking exactly as I remembered her: sharp suit, keen eyes, and an expression that missed nothing. "Miss Chen? I'm Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. May I come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Is this about the news? About my father's company?" She studied me carefully. "You don't seem surprised." "My stepmother just inherited everything," I said, leading her to my small living room. I've been estranged from the family business for years. My father and we didn't see eye to eye on many things." "When did you last have access to Chen Industries operations?" "I never did," I said truthfully. "My father made it very clear that the business was not for me. He said I was too soft, too much like my mother." I let my voice catch on the mention of my real mother, who had died when I was 10. Another victim of Victoria's ambitions, though I could never prove it. Agent Martinez took notes, then looked up. "We'll need to verify that, of course. You should know that anyone involved in Chen Industries operations in the last 5 years will be subject to investigation." "I understand, but you won't find my name on anything." Victoria made sure of that. The bitterness in my voice was real, though not for the reasons Martinez might assume. "Your stepmother claims you had access to company accounts." I almost laughed. Victoria has been systematically excluding me from everything since she married my father 8 years ago. Check the corporate records. I'm not on a single document, not authorized for any account, not even listed as an emergency contact. She wanted to ensure I had no claim to anything. Martinez made more notes. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. In the meantime, don't leave town. After she left, I walked down to the restaurant below. The original Chen's kitchen was small, just 12 tables and a kitchen barely big enough for 3 people to work in, but it had been my grandparents' pride and joy. They'd built their American dream here, one dumpling at a time before my father had gotten ambitious and greedy. I'd already hired back the old staff my father had let go. Uncle Wei, who wasn't really my uncle but had worked for my grandparents for 30 years, and Auntie Ming, whose soup dumplings were legendary in the neighborhood. They looked at me with such warmth when I told them I was reopening the restaurant, keeping everything exactly as my grandparents had run it. Your grandmother would be so proud, Auntie Ming had said, tears in her eyes. You have her spirit. If only she knew that grandmother's spirit was quite literally guiding me. Not in a supernatural way, but through memories of lessons she'd taught me in both lives. Patience, Lily. The patient hunter gets the fattest duck. 2 weeks later, the real bombshell dropped. The FBI announced that their investigation had uncovered connections to Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch on the international sanctions list. Suddenly, it wasn't just about money laundering, it was about national security, terrorism financing, and violation of international sanctions. The prosecutors added charges that could put Victoria away for life. I was at the restaurant, teaching our new line cook how to fold wontons the way my grandmother had, when Cassandra burst through the door. She looked terrible. Designer clothes wrinkled, hair unwashed, makeup smeared. The perfect princess had fallen far. You, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this. You knew. You had to have known. Every customer in the restaurant turned to stare. Uncle Wei moved protectively closer to me, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm. I'll handle this. Cassandra, I said calmly, you're making a scene. If you want to talk, we can go upstairs. Don't you dare act innocent. Her voice cracked with hysteria. Mom's facing life in prison. They froze all our accounts. They took everything. The penthouse, the cars, the vacation homes, everything. And you're just here playing with your little restaurant like nothing happened. I'm here because this is what I inherited, I said evenly. A restaurant and $50,000. Your mother made sure that's all I got, remember? You were there, gloating about turning my bedroom into a closet. But you knew. She was crying now, ugly sobs that made her whole body shake. You had to know what Dad's company really was. How would I know? I asked. When was I ever included in anything? When did your mother ever let me near the business? She spent 8 years making sure I was nobody in that family, and now you want to blame me because her greed finally caught up with her. Cassandra lunged at me, but Uncle Wei caught her arms, holding her back with surprising strength for a 70-year-old man. Miss, you need to leave now, he said firmly, or I call police. This isn't over, Cassandra screamed as he escorted her to the door. I know you did something, I'll prove it. But she wouldn't prove anything because I hadn't done anything, not technically. I'd simply chosen not to fight for a poisoned inheritance. I'd let Victoria's greed blind her to the danger, just as she'd let her greed blind her to everything else, including her husband's criminal empire crumbling around him. The next few months passed in a blur of investigators, subpoenas, and media attention. The Chen Industries scandal became national news when connections to 3 senators and a federal judge were uncovered. Every day brought new revelations, each one worse than the last. Through it all, I maintained my simple routine. Running the restaurant, living in my small apartment, cooperating fully with every investigation. The key to my salvation was exactly what had damned me in my previous life: documentation. But this time, instead of having my signature mysteriously appear on incriminating documents, the paper trail showed exactly what Victoria had always wanted: that I had been completely excluded from everything. Every email where she'd specifically removed me from meetings, every revised document that deleted my name from succession planning, every corporate memo that emphasized I had no role in the company. All of it became evidence that I couldn't possibly have been involved in the criminal enterprise. Agent Martinez interviewed me 6 more times over those months, each time digging deeper, clearly suspicious of how conveniently I'd been spared. During our fourth interview, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with those sharp eyes. "You're either the luckiest person alive or the smartest," she said finally. "Your stepmother's jealousy saved you from federal prison." "My stepmother's jealousy destroyed my family long before the FBI showed up," I replied. "She took my father, my home, my inheritance. Turns out she was just stealing things that were already rotten." Martinez nodded slowly. "Your father. We found evidence he was planning to flee the country. He had tickets booked to Montenegro for the week after he died. One way. Only for himself." This was news to me, both in this life and the previous one. He was going to abandon us all. Looks like it. He knew the walls were closing in. His heart attack might have been the only thing that kept him from spending his last years as a fugitive. I thought about Victoria's digitalis tea and almost smiled. She'd killed him to get his money, not knowing he was about to run and leave us all to burn. There was a poetic justice in that. The trial was a sensation. Victoria, once so perfectly composed, looked haggard and old in her orange jumpsuit. She'd aged 10 years and 6 months, her hair gray at the roots, her face gaunt. Cassandra sat in the gallery every day glaring at me whenever I was called to testify. My testimony was simple and truthful. I knew nothing about Chen Industries operations because I had been systematically excluded from them. Every piece of evidence supported this. The prosecutors actually thanked Victoria's lawyers for providing such comprehensive documentation of my exclusion from the family business. "It's rare," the lead prosecutor told me during a break, "to see such clear evidence of someone being kept away from criminal activity. Your stepmother's antipathy toward you is probably the only reason you're not a co-defendant." Victoria was convicted on all charges: money laundering, conspiracy, wire fraud, violations of international sanctions, and 16 other federal crimes. The judge, perhaps influenced by the revelation that the bribes had reached into the judicial system itself, showed no mercy. Life without parole. Cassandra was convicted as an accessory after the fact. Apparently, she'd been helping move money through her own boutique business, thinking she was just hiding assets from taxes. She got 5 years and would serve at least 3. The day of sentencing, Victoria's lawyer approached me with an offer. "She wants to make a deal," he said. "Information about other accounts, hidden assets, in exchange for a sentence reduction." "That's between her and the FBI," I said. "She wants to talk to you first. She says she has information about your mother's death." In my previous life, I would have jumped at this, desperate to know the truth. But I already knew the truth. I'd seen the searches on Victoria's computer in that life, too. Poison, undetectable autopsy. Inheritance rights, minor children. Digitalis, heart failure. My mother, my father, and almost me. "No," I said simply. "I don't make deals with murderers." The lawyer looked surprised, but nodded and left. A year later, the restaurant was thriving. We'd been featured in the San Francisco Chronicle as a legacy reborn, and there was a line out the door every evening. I'd used part of the $50,000 to renovate the kitchen and update the dining room, but I'd kept the original recipes, the original spirit. Uncle Wei and Auntie Ming ran the kitchen while I managed the business side, and we'd hired 6 more employees from the neighborhood. The real windfall came from an unexpected source. My father's storage unit, the one with his insurance files, also contained something else. Bonds. Bearer bonds from the 1980s purchased by my grandparents as their retirement fund, worth nearly $2 million. They were completely legitimate, predating any of my father's criminal activities. As the sole surviving heir not convicted of federal crimes, they came to me. I was reviewing the restaurant's books one evening when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up to see a woman in her 60s, well-dressed but tired-looking, with eyes that looked familiar. "Are you Lily Chen?" she asked. "Yes, can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Morrison, Victoria's mother." I tensed, but she held up a hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I wanted to apologize." This I hadn't expected. Apologize? She sat down uninvited, her hands trembling slightly. I knew what Victoria was. I've always known. She was a difficult child, manipulative, cruel to her younger siblings. When she married your father, I warned him, but he was already in too deep with his business dealings to listen. Why are you telling me this? Because I heard what she did to you, and to your father, and probably to your mother, too. I've been visiting her in prison, and she bragged about it. About the digitalis, about framing you in the first timeline. The what? My blood ran cold. Patricia looked confused. She kept talking about how she'd won the first time, how you'd gone to prison instead of her, but then everything reset and you somehow knew things. The psychiatrist says she's having a break from reality, but she studied my face. You know what she's talking about, don't you? I kept my expression carefully neutral. Victoria says a lot of things. Patricia nodded slowly. I suppose she does. She stood to leave, then paused. Your grandparents would be proud of what you've done with this place. I ate here once, years ago, when they were still alive. The food tastes exactly the same. After she left, I sat in the empty restaurant, thinking about Victoria in her cell, ranting about timelines and resets, sounding crazy to everyone who heard her. She knew something had changed, but she'd never be able to prove it, never be able to convince anyone. She'd spend the rest of her life in prison, knowing I'd somehow beaten her, but never understanding how. The next morning, I got a call from Agent Martinez. Thought you'd want to know, she said. Dmitry Volkov was arrested in Moscow. He's being extradited. Your father's records, the ones found in Discovery, led to the breakthrough. That's good, I said, and meant it. You know, I've been doing this job for 15 years, Martinez continued. I've seen a lot of family businesses turn out to be criminal enterprises. Usually everyone goes down with the ship. You're the exception. Lucky, I guess. Maybe. Or maybe you had a guardian angel looking out for you. Your grandmother, perhaps. The neighbors all say she was quite a force. I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's lessons echoing across 2 lifetimes. She was. She used to say that patience and wisdom would always defeat greed and cruelty in the end. Smart woman. Well, take care, Miss Chen. Enjoy your freedom. Freedom. I thought about that word a lot in the following days. In my first life, I'd lost it to Victoria's machinations, dying in a federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. In this life, I was free while she rotted in a cell, driven half mad by the knowledge that, somehow, impossibly, I had known exactly what was coming. 6 months later, I was contacted by a Hollywood producer who wanted to buy the rights to my story for a television series. The evil stepmother, the criminal empire, the daughter who escaped it all. It's perfect, she gushed. I declined politely. The real story was better than anything Hollywood could imagine, but it was also impossible to tell. Who would believe that I'd lived through it all before? That I'd died in prison and woken up with a second chance? Who would believe that my greatest revenge was simply stepping aside and letting Victoria's greed lead her exactly where she'd sent me the first time? Instead, I focused on building something real. The restaurant expanded to a second location, then a third. I hired kids from the neighborhood, many of them from families struggling like mine had before my father's criminal success. I taught them what my grandmother had taught me, that honest work and patience would always triumph over shortcuts and greed. I started dating James, a software engineer who came to the restaurant every Friday for the soup dumplings and finally worked up the courage to ask me out. He knew about my family's scandal, of course, everyone did, but he also knew who I really was, a survivor who'd rebuilt her life from ashes. You know what I admire most about you, he said one evening as we walked through Chinatown after closing. You could have been bitter. You could have fought for that company, tried to clear your father's name, spent years in court trying to get what you thought was yours. Instead, you just let it go and built something better. If only he knew how right he was. I had fought for it in another life, and it had destroyed me. This time, I'd learned the lesson my grandmother had tried to teach me all along. Sometimes the best way to win is not to play. 3 years after Victoria's conviction, I received a letter from federal prison. I recognized Cassandra's handwriting immediately. Lily, it read, I know you won't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something. Mom is sick. Cancer, stage 4. She doesn't have long. She's been asking for you. She says she needs to tell you something about the timeline, about how you knew. I don't understand what she means, but she's desperate. Please. I read the letter twice, then fed it into the shredder. Victoria could die with her questions unanswered, just as I had died in that prison shower in my first life, alone and abandoned. The difference was I got a second chance. She wouldn't. A week later, I read in the news that Victoria Chen had died in federal prison. The obituary was brief, noting only that she was survived by a daughter, currently incarcerated. There was no mention of the empire she'd killed to steal, no mention of the stepdaughter she'd tried to destroy. She died as she had lived, grasping for things that were never really hers. That night, I stood in my grandmother's restaurant, now mine, surrounded by the warmth and life we'd built. The dinner rush was in full swing, families laughing over steaming plates of noodles, couples sharing dumplings, the air rich with the smell of five spice and ginger. This was real wealth, community, honesty, and the knowledge that everything here was built on solid ground. My phone rang. It was Martinez, now retired from the FBI and working as a consultant. We'd stayed in touch, an odd friendship born from mutual respect. "Did you hear?" she asked. "About Victoria?" "Yes. You know, she spent her last years insisting you somehow knew about the investigation in advance, that you deliberately let her take the company knowing it was about to be raided." "That's crazy," I said calmly. "That's what everyone said, but Lily, between you and me, did you know?" I watched Uncle Wei teaching our newest cook the proper way to season the wok, the same way my grandmother had taught him 40 years ago. Some knowledge transcends a single lifetime. "Agent Martinez," I said, "how could I have known? I was completely excluded from the business, remember? Your investigation proved that." She was quiet for a moment. "You're right, of course. It's just, the timing was so perfect. 3 days after she inherited, the raids happened. If you had somehow known and deliberately stepped aside, that would make me either psychic or the luckiest person alive," I finished. "Or the smartest," she added, echoing her words from years ago. "Well, however it happened, you came out on top. Your grandmother would be proud." After we hung up, I walked through the restaurant, stopping to chat with regular customers, checking on the kitchen, making sure everything was running smoothly. In the office, I had a photo of my grandmother, taken in this very restaurant 50 years ago. She was smiling, flower on her apron, absolutely content with her life's work. Next to it was a newer photo, me in the same spot, wearing a similar apron, the same contentment on my face. But unlike my grandmother, I had the knowledge of what could have been, what had been, and what I'd chosen instead. The next morning brought unexpected news. A team of federal investigators had discovered more of Volkov's assets hidden in various shell companies. And as part of the asset forfeiture related to Chen Industries, the government would be distributing settlements to victims of the fraud. As the only innocent party directly affected by the conspiracy who had lost her rightful inheritance to a convicted conspirator, I would receive a settlement of $12 million. "It's unusual," the federal prosecutor explained over the phone, "but your case is unique. You were demonstrably excluded from the criminal enterprise, yet suffered direct financial harm when the conspirators prevented you from inheriting legitimate family assets." The restaurant and small trust were clearly intended to be insulting, while the criminals kept the valuable assets for themselves. I thought about refusing it. I had everything I needed. But then I thought about all the families in Chinatown struggling to make ends meet, all the kids who needed scholarships, all the small businesses one disaster away from closing. "I'll take it," I said, "on one condition. I want to establish a foundation, the Chen Family Redemption Trust." It was poetic, really. Money that had come from crime would go toward preventing it. Kids would go to college instead of joining gangs. Families would keep their businesses instead of turning to loan sharks. The poison my father had pumped into the world would become medicine. The announcement of the foundation made headlines, especially when I named Agent Martinez as one of the board members. From criminal empire to community champion, the Lily Chen story ran in the Washington Post. They called me for an interview, but I declined. The real story wasn't mine to tell. It belonged to two lifetimes, one I'd lived and one I'd survived. 5 years after Victoria's death, I stood in front of a gathering at the Chinatown Community Center. We were celebrating the 100th scholarship awarded by the foundation. The recipient was a young woman whose parents had been victims of a different financial fraud. She was going to law school to become a prosecutor. Miss Chen, she said, tears in her eyes, you saved my life. After my parents lost everything, I thought I'd never go to college, much less law school. You gave me a future. No, I said, thinking of my own second chance. You always had a future. Sometimes we just need someone to clear the obstacles from our path. As I spoke to the gathered crowd about resilience and redemption, I caught a glimpse of someone in the back. Cassandra, recently released from prison, looking older and worn but present. Our eyes met across the room. She nodded once, acknowledgement of something, regret perhaps, or understanding. Then she slipped out the door and I knew I'd never see her again. That night, James and I had dinner at the original restaurant. We'd been married 2 years now, and I was 6 months pregnant with our daughter. I'd already decided on her name, Grace, after my grandmother, whose Chinese name Mei Hui meant beautiful wisdom. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd fought for the company? James asked, rubbing my swollen belly gently. If you'd won it instead of Victoria? I thought about prison bars, about blood on concrete, about dying alone and forgotten. I would have lost everything, I said truthfully. Victoria did me a favor by being too greedy to share. Still, it must have been hard watching her take everything. My grandmother used to say that when someone insists on swallowing poison, the kindest thing you can do is step out of their way. I smiled, feeling the baby kick. Victoria was always going to swallow that poison. She just wanted company. The next morning, I visited my parents' graves. They were buried side by side, my mother's stone weathered by 15 years of rain. My father's still relatively new. I placed flowers on both, though they deserved different things. My mother deserved justice. My father deserved judgment. Both had been delivered, just not in the way anyone could have expected. I know what you both did, I said quietly. Mom, I know she killed you. Dad, I know you let her, too blinded by your own crimes to see hers. But I want you to know, I'm okay, better than okay. I got the life you never could have given me, the honest life grandmother wanted for all of us. A breeze rustled through the cemetery, and for a moment, I could swear I smelled 5-spice and sesame oil, the scent of my grandmother's kitchen. Probably my imagination, but in a life where I'd already died once and been reborn, who was to say what was possible? The FBI had one more surprise for me. They'd found records indicating that Chen Industries had been founded with legitimate money, my grandparents' savings, but my father had gradually corrupted it with Volkoff's dirty money. After extensive forensic accounting, they had determined that approximately $30 million in assets could be traced back to the original legal investment. It's been in escrow while we'd sorted through everything, Martinez told me over coffee. But it's yours, free and clear, your grandparents' actual legacy, separated from your father's crimes. $30 million. In my first life, I'd fought for a company worth 10 times that and ended up with a prison cell. In this life, I'd walked away from everything and ended up with more than I could have imagined. I knew exactly what to do with it. The Chen Family Culinary Institute would offer free training to anyone from an underprivileged background who wanted to learn the restaurant business. Not just cooking, the business side, the management, the honest way to build something lasting. My grandmother's recipes would be taught alongside accounting, her dumpling folding techniques alongside business ethics. The night before the Institute's grand opening, I couldn't sleep. I stood in the industrial kitchen we'd built, gleaming with new equipment but infused with old wisdom. Every station had a photo of my grandmother demonstrating a technique, and her handwritten recipes had been preserved under glass at each prep area. I thought about Victoria, dead now 3 years, who had schemed and murdered for wealth that turned to ash in her hands. I thought about my father, who had built an empire on sand and prepared to abandon it when the tide came in. I thought about Cassandra, rebuilding her life somewhere far from here, forever marked by her mother's choices. And I thought about myself, both versions. The one who'd died in prison, believing she'd lost everything, and the one standing here now, who'd learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. You did it, grandmother, I whispered to the empty kitchen. You taught me patience, and patience saved me. The opening was a massive success. 300 people attended, including city officials, celebrity chefs, and, most importantly, dozens of young people eager to learn. The first class was already full, with a waiting list for the next 3 sessions. As I stood at the podium to give my opening remarks, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. Mr. Brennan, the estate lawyer who'd read my father's will all those years ago. He looked older, but smiled warmly when our eyes met. After the ceremony, he approached me. "Miss Chen, Mrs. Liu now, I believe. Congratulations on everything you've built." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I owe you an apology. I knew something was off about that will, about the timing of the amendments. Your father had come to me just days before his death, insisting on changing everything immediately. I should have questioned it more, should have protected your interests better." "You did your job," I said. "You followed my father's wishes." Still, when I heard about the FBI investigation, about what Chen Industries really was, I realized you'd been saved by Victoria's greed. If she hadn't insisted on taking everything, I would have been destroyed, I finished. "I know." He studied me carefully. "You know, the day of the reading, you seemed almost relieved, like you were expecting it." I smiled. Maybe I was just tired of fighting for scraps from their table. Maybe I knew my grandmother's restaurant was worth more than my father's empire. "Maybe," he said, but his eyes suggested he suspected more. "Well, congratulations again. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud." As the evening wound down and the last guests left, I stood with James in the Institute's dining room, where students would share meals and build community. On the wall was a timeline of the Chen family history: my grandparents arriving in America, the restaurant's opening, its various expansions. The criminal years were notably absent, skipped over like a bad dream between the restaurant's founding and its rebirth. "No mention of Chen Industries," James noted. "Why would there be? This is about building something new from something old and good. Chen Industries was never really ours. It was Volkov's. My father was just holding it for him. This," I gestured to the Institute, "this is the real Chen legacy." That night, I dreamed I was back in the prison shower, blood spreading across concrete, my vision fading. But instead of dying, I stood up, the wound healing, the blood reversing its flow. I walked backward through the trial, through the investigation, through the will reading, all the way back to the moment I'd awakened in my 21-year-old body. "You can't change the past," my grandmother said in the dream, appearing beside me in her flour-dusted apron, "but you can choose not to repeat it." I woke to find Grace, now 3 years old, standing by my bedside. "Mama, bad dream." "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into bed with me. "Just remembering something important." The next day brought an unexpected visitor to the restaurant. A young woman, maybe 25, with familiar features. She looked like Victoria, but softer somehow. "Are you Lily Chen?" she asked nervously. "Liu now, but yes. And you are?" "Sophie Morrison. Victoria was my aunt, Cassandra's cousin." I tensed, but she held up her hands quickly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For the foundation. I got one of your scholarships 2 years ago. You didn't know who I was. I applied under my father's name, not Morrison. But it paid for my nursing degree, and now I work at SF General, in the pediatric ward." She pulled out an envelope. "I've been saving to pay it back." "No," I said firmly. "Scholarships aren't loans. That money was meant to help people build better lives regardless of who they're related to." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "After everything my aunt did to you, you're not your aunt. We don't inherit our family's sins, only their lessons. The question is what we learn from them." She nodded, composing herself. "My grandmother, Patricia, she told me you were kind. She said you could have been cruel when she came to apologize, but you weren't." "Cruelty is a poison," I said, thinking of digitalis and tea, of Victoria's schemes, of my father's crimes. "The only person it really destroys is the one serving it." After Sophie left, I found myself thinking about second chances, not just mine, but everyone's. Sophie choosing nursing over her family's pattern of taking. Cassandra rebuilding somewhere far away. Even Victoria had been given chances she'd refused, too blinded by greed to see them. The Institute graduated its first class 6 months later. 24 students, each one now equipped to run their own restaurant or manage someone else's. The graduation ceremony was held in the original Chen's kitchen, packed far beyond capacity, but nobody minded standing. One graduate, Marcus, had been in a gang before finding our program. In his speech, he said, "Miss Lily taught us that the secret ingredient in every recipe isn't something you can buy. It's honesty. You can taste it in the food when it's made with clean hands and a clear conscience." I thought Victoria would have laughed at that. She'd believed the secret ingredient was money, power, taking what you wanted. But she was dead, and her empire was dust. While my grandmother's recipes lived on in 24 new sets of hands. That evening, as we cleaned up after the celebration, James found me in the kitchen, crying over a cutting board of onions, though the onions were just an excuse. "Happy tears?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Complicated tears," I admitted. "I'm thinking about all the different ways this could have gone. But it went this way, the right way. The second way," I said without thinking, then caught myself. James turned me around to face him. "You know, sometimes you say things that make me think you've lived a whole other life I don't know about." I looked into his eyes, this good man who loved me without knowing about the prison cell, the death, the rebirth. "Would you love me if I had?" "I'd love you in any lifetime," he said simply. That night, I made the decision to write it all down. Not for publication, not for anyone else, but for Grace. Someday, when she was old enough, she might need to know that sometimes the universe gives us second chances, but only if we're wise enough to recognize them and brave enough to take a different path. I started with the ending. I died when I was 28, bleeding out on a prison floor, convicted of crimes I didn't commit but couldn't escape. Then I woke up 3 months before it all went wrong, with the knowledge to step aside and let my stepmother claim the poisoned crown she'd killed to steal. This is the story of how I learned that the best revenge isn't taking what was stolen from you. It's building something better from what they overlooked. 10 years had passed since Victoria's death, 15 since the will reading that changed everything. The Chen Family Culinary Institute had graduated 300 students. The foundation had given out over 1,000 scholarships. The original restaurant had become a landmark featured in guidebooks and food shows, but still serving the same recipes my grandmother had perfected. I was in my office at the Institute when Martinez called. She was fully retired now, spending her time writing mystery novels based loosely on her cases. "I'm working on a story inspired by the Chen Industries case," she said. "Changed all the names, of course, but the premise is similar. I wanted to run something by you." "Go ahead." In my version, the protagonist knows about the crimes in advance. Maybe she's psychic. Maybe she time traveled. Maybe she just figured it out. I haven't decided. But she deliberately lets the stepmother take the corrupt company to destroy her. What do you think? I smiled. I think that would make a hell of a story, but wouldn't readers find it unbelievable? That's what my editor says. Too convenient, too perfect. But you know what? Sometimes real life is stranger than fiction. Yes, I agreed, sometimes it is. After we hung up, I walked through the Institute, watching afternoon classes in session. In one kitchen, students were learning to make my grandmother's famous soup dumplings. In another, they were studying food safety regulations. In the dining room, a group was practicing front-of-house service. All of this, every student, every lesson, every life changed, had grown from Victoria's greed and my decision not to fight it. She'd thought she was taking everything from me, not knowing she was handing me my freedom and, ultimately, the power to build something she could never have imagined. I found a text from Cassandra on my phone, sent from a number I didn't recognize. "Saw the news about the Institute's expansion. Mom would have hated it. All that money going to help other people instead of keeping it for yourself. I think that's why it's perfect. Don't respond to this. I just needed you to know that I understand now. You knew, didn't you? Somehow you knew what was coming. Thank you for letting us destroy ourselves instead of you." I deleted the message without responding, but I smiled. Even Cassandra, in her way, had learned the lesson. Sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when not to fight. That evening, there was a celebration at the restaurant for the Lunar New Year. The place was packed with families, students, graduates, and friends. Grace, now 8, was helping serve dumplings, carefully carrying plates with the concentration of someone handling precious cargo. Mama, she said during a quiet moment, tell me the story about great-grandmother again. Which one? The one about the patient hunter and the fat duck? I laughed, pulling her onto my lap. Your great-grandmother used to say that the patient hunter gets the fattest duck. It means that if you wait, if you're smart, if you don't grab for the first thing you see, you'll end up with something much better. Like how you waited and got the restaurant instead of the bad company? Kids understood more than we gave them credit for. Exactly like that. Was great-grandmother very smart? The smartest woman I ever knew. And you know what? She's still teaching me things. Even though she's gone. Especially because she's gone. The best teachers leave lessons that outlive them. As midnight approached and fireworks began illuminating the sky over Chinatown, I stood with my family. James, Grace, Uncle Wei, now in his 80s but still coming to the restaurant every day, Auntie Ming, and all our extended family of employees and students. To new beginnings, James toasted, raising his glass of champagne. To second chances, I added quietly, and we drank. Later, after everyone had gone home and the restaurant was quiet, I stood alone in the kitchen where my grandmother had taught me to make dumplings in my first life, where I'd learned to make them again in my second. On the wall was her picture, and beneath it, a simple plaque. Mei Hui Chen, 1935 to 2016. Her patience was her power. Thank you, I whispered to her picture. For the lessons, for the restaurant, for the wisdom to know when to fight and when to step aside. For teaching me that sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all, just building something better from the ashes of what they burned. A sound made me turn. Grace had come back down, rubbing sleepy eyes. Mama, are you talking to great-grandmother? Just thanking her. For what? I picked up my daughter, feeling her small weight in my arms, knowing that she would grow up free from the poison that had infected my family for so long. For teaching me that the only way to win a rigged game is not to play. I don't understand. You will someday. When you're older, I'll tell you a story about a girl who lost everything and gained the world, who died and lived again, who learned that the greatest power isn't taking what others have, it's building something they could never imagine. Is it a true story? I carried her back upstairs to our apartment, thinking of prison cells and federal investigations, of Victoria's schemes and my father's crimes, of death and rebirth, and the strange spiral of fate that had brought me here. The truest story I know, I said, tucking her into bed. And someday, when you're ready, I'll tell you every word. But for now, she was young, and the night was peaceful, and the restaurant below us thrummed with the honest energy of my grandmother's legacy, finally free from the shadows that had once threatened to consume it. In the end, Victoria had been right about one thing. I hadn't inherited my father's business acumen. I'd inherited something far more valuable. My grandmother's wisdom, patience, and the ability to recognize when someone is offering you poison disguised as wine. And that had made all the difference, not just in one lifetime, but in two.